Well, good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to Live from the Archive. My name is Tom Ferber. I'm an Engagement Learning Officer here at London Metropolitan Archives. I think we might have a few people joining us in person. Are you here for the talk? Yeah, please come over. We're just getting settled in. So welcome everybody at home. Welcome those of you who are joining us in person as well. For those of you who've not been watching these talks before, it's a hybrid event, so you can see we've got some people in the room and we've got some people joining us at home as well. And for the people at home, can I just check you can hear me okay? I've not done I did a quick sound test. I want to make sure that everyone can hear us okay at home. Seems to be. You'll be telling us if we weren't, I'm sure. So good. Okay, so just in terms of housekeeping, you can all hear me, that's great. Please feel free to ask questions. We'll take questions both from the people in person and from the audience at home at the end, and we'll talk for about 15 minutes on the exhibition. So Live from the Archive is a series of talks where we dwell on a few items and a single item, a handful of items on display in our exhibition. And our new exhibition, still new I would say, opened in March, is Unforgotten Lives, Rediscovering Londoners of African, Asian, Caribbean and Indigenous heritage from 1560 to 1860. And it's exploring those lives based on a big piece of research we did called Switching the Lens, which was a piece of work going back over our Anglican parish registers and a wider search through our archive. And today what we'll be looking at is some of the history of migration to London, and as well we'll be looking at some of the ways the kind of migration to London and more particularly the global trade shaped the very fabric of London. So we'll mostly be today focusing on the panel that's to my left, but it would be remiss of me not to mention the map behind us. This is a flow map that's based on the Switching the Lens database, and as you can see we have the UK, London, at the top corner of the map, and the black bars that you can see gravitating towards London represent journeys to London. Some of them voluntary, many of them forced. And this is 135 journeys to London that have been identified in that Switching the Lens database. Some of them are exact place names, some of them are approximate, allowing for obviously the changes in sort of historical geography. Sam, you're looking a bit confused there. Is everything okay with the stream?
The camera is slightly crooked, I'd say.
If we can very quickly adjust it, we will. Otherwise, we might just have to sing the nursery rhyme about the crooked person that lived in a shoe to ourselves and accept it. So we'll just have a very quick camera change, see if we can uncrooked the camera. But if not, we might just have to make do. I think that's probably the best that we can do without causing undue disruption. But thank you for that. We'll try and be a bit less crooked for next time. So at the flow map, we have the flow map behind us. But really, I want to spend a bit more time on the displays to my left. And Simon, can we have the next scene, please? Yeah, so the slide should have changed now, but I hadn't done it already.
Repeat that simply the transition because people lost the sound.
Okay, the sound lost with the okay, jolly good. So we found the sound and we're all good. So apologies, having a few teething problems today. My apologies for that. Hopefully we'll be back on track from here on in. So one of the big physical impacts, geographical impacts of this huge growth in trade during the 18th century was the building of the London docks. And on the map, on my left and on the screen, if you're at home, we can see a print from 1809 of the East India Docks. And this was part of the new complex of docks which would spread all along the Thames from the start of the 1800s right through to the 20th, right through to the middle of the 20th century before they went into decline. And what these docks were a recognition of was this huge volume of trade coming from other parts of the world, the huge sort of profitability of that trade, but also we should say the inadequacy of the existing system, whereby all trade coming into London had to be funneled through what's called the legal quays. So these were only a few designated points on the Thames where goods could be unloaded, and this caused all kinds of mischief and mayhem of delays, of theft, of stealing. And by the end of the 1700s, it was seen as no longer fit for purpose. And then what we see then is the influence of this hugely powerful trading lobby in changing the infrastructure through laws. And we'll pick up that when we look at the second plan, but it'd be remiss not to just have a few looks at the details of this. So as I said, this is a plan of a print of the East India Docks by William Daniel, 1809. And what we can see here is two docks, so two pools within the docks, one for goods being exported and one for being imported. So the idea is you can unload in one dock and then load up in the other one. The customs could be arranged on the same site, and the walls and the warehouses allow for safe storage and transfer of the goods. East India Docks, so these were the docks for goods coming from the East Indies, so that would today correspond with sort of the modern day Indian subcontinent and Southeast Asia, and the very infamous name of British colonialism and British Empire, the East India Company. So these docks were owned by the East India Company. They had a monopoly on the use of the docks, and they had a monopoly on the trade coming from the East Indies, and in particular India. So the most famous commodities that they would have been working with would have been cotton from India and tea from China. And we should say at this time, well, many points in history, and this is an example, there is a very blurred line between trade, warfare, violence and conquest, and this is a story that is very much told in the East India Company. So they start as traders and end up effectively conquering large parts of the Indian subcontinent, which are then folded in and become part of the British Empire. And we'll have the next slide now, I think, please, Simon. So if the East Indies corresponds to sort of modern day Indian subcontinent and Southeast Asia, the West Indies corresponds with today's Caribbean. And we can see now on your screen or in person, you can see this plan. This is a plan of the West India Docks and the canal in the Isle of Dogs. So of the two docks, this was actually the first of the two to be built, and it really does show the influence of the so-called plantation lobby in British politics and in obviously the history of London building as well. And there's a particular name that we associate with the building of these docks. That's Robert Milligan. Robert Milligan was what's called a slave factor at the time. So he basically traded in enslaved people on a wholesale level and became very rich in doing so. He made his fortune in this dark trade in Jamaica. Then he came back to London and was dismayed at the inefficiency of the dock system, and therefore he used his powerful influence. The plantation lobby, as we heard, had a big influence in British politics at this time to get these new docks built, and was able to enjoy a monopoly on the use of the docks for the first 20 years after they were built. And it's Robert Milligan who was the figure that some of you might remember about 3 years ago, who was standing outside, the statue of him was standing outside the Museum of London Docklands, was brought down and brought inside the museum as part of a series of protests at that time. I should say that the modern West India Docks is the site of Canary Wharf, and the plan we can see here is as it was originally built, and another dock was added a bit later where it says canal on this plan. And one of the things that we see in both of these images, the print before and the plan now, is an emphasis on the ships, an emphasis on the infrastructure, and very little emphasis very little emphasis on the people. There are some people sort of sketched in on the first print that we looked at, but these are very much sort of decorative. You know, it's clear what we are being told to admire and enjoy is the order of the docks, you know, the elegance of the ships, rather than understand the people. And so one of the really good things that's come out of the research that's fed this exhibition is an emphasis on people, and perhaps some of the people that would have been left out perhaps in previous scholarship, or certainly left out in terms of which lives were deemed important at the time. So I'm just going to very quickly change the slide. And in doing so, we have now brought up a will from 1754, part of the collection of the Diocese of London Archive. And what you can see, this is a sort of fairly classic format for a will. It's a mixture of if you're in person, you might want to feel free to move around so you can see it properly. This is a fairly classic format for a will of this time. It's a mixture of handwritten and print. Some of it is boilerplate kind of standard formulation, and some of it is unique information to the person that we're interested in. And this gives us information of one Thomas Falkland, described as a mariner and a black and free man, native of the island of Jamaica. This is written in 1754, and we get a few sort of sparse details of Thomas Falkland's life from this will. As would not be uncommon, we can assume that he was illiterate or couldn't write his name, because his name is marked with an X. So the will would have been formed. Most of the writing would have been formed by a clerk. We get a sense that he has probably a fairly small set of possessions, probably little family, because his possessions are being left to a shipmate, and he's buried at sea. We don't have a record of the burial. We can only see from this will that was his request to be buried at sea. And reading between the lines, that might be again a further comment on his sort of economic status as well, the level of burial that he could afford. And we'll have the next slide now, please, Simon. And in changing slides, we're also going to skip forward the best part of a century to the 1839. And what we can see on the screen is what's called a pauper's examination. So there have been many changes to London between 1754 and 1839. But for our purposes, one of the most important to say is that a new poor law is in effect, a new welfare system is in effect. And this is we're now in the realms of the workhouse, that sort of Dickensian workhouse that will be familiar to many of you, I'm sure. And so this is a pauper examination, which is part of that system from the Stepney Board of Guardians, who are in charge of that particular workhouse. And so a pauper examination is what it sounds like. Someone is being sort of examined about their sort of monetary status and about their poverty status. And what we can glean from this, so similar to the other will we just saw, it's a combination of boilerplate and filled in by hand. This gives us a glimpse, and it really is only a glimpse, of the lives of some of the people that have been working on the ships that we saw in that first print. And you'll forgive me just reading to make sure I get it right. So this is the examination of one Guyton Francis. He's a 26-year-old and he's a native of Bombay. So it's likely he's worked on one of the ships that's been working on the docks. He's come in as modern terms akin to kind of casual labour. He's sent to the workhouse after being picked up by the police on the 11th of April 1839 at 2 o'clock in the morning. And it notes that he was found in the streets somewhere by the London docks. And the Board of Guardians is therefore investigating his plight, as they would see it. And the text at the bottom there is an indication of that. And again, we only get glimpses of these lives, and we do have to sort of infer. But I'm going to read that last bit pretty much in its entirety, because I think that it's interesting. So the Board of Guardians, and bear in mind, these are people that are used to dealing with the crushing poverty of London on a daily basis and have probably become fairly cold, inured, you might say, to suffering as part of that. We perhaps can read between the lines a certain degree of sympathy. So they say, this poor fellow, who has barely sufficient knowledge of English to make himself understood, says that he arrived in England about 2 months ago and has been wandering the streets ever since, begging. So I think there is perhaps a sense of this man has been abandoned, and this is something that we understand from the kind of labour practices of the day, in that they would only be earning whilst you were on the ship. You would take a ship in, that would be the end of your contract in big inverted commas. You would work, and then it would be up to you to find another ship for your employ home. And you can see there's very little, again, to use sort of modern concepts, kind of duty of care in the meantime. So I hope that gives a little bit of an insight into kind of some of the ideas behind the exhibition, and also how we can use different types of archival sources to kind of bring one alive. No one source gives us the key to unlock the past all by itself, but if we kind of layer them together, it gives us a more complete picture. So very happy now to take questions, both from people obviously in the room, or if you're at home, if you'd like to ask any questions, then please do. Are there any questions for anyone in the room to start with? Don't have to be. No, that's fine. Thank you. That's okay. That's great. And what about the people at home, Simon? Any questions? Okay. Well, we'll give people just a few seconds. Sometimes it takes a minute for them to. I know if you're anything like me, it takes a few seconds. Questions to come in my head, get it through my fingers and onto the screen. So just whilst we're doing that, I'll say that these talks run every month. So they're the first Tuesday of the month at 12:30. So we'll be back next month, which will be July the 4th. As part of that, we'll be talking about the so-called Black Loyalists. So these were the soldiers that were, fought on the British side during the American War of Independence. And also, as well as the Live from the Archives series of talks, we have a longer, more extended talk on the 4th Tuesday of the month, and that's at 1 o'clock. And both of those will be available in person and online as well. Were there any questions in the meantime there, Simon? Yes.
Yes, so there are questions. The question is, did they accept him into the workhouse? So we know involved in all the
I don't know, but we could find out, and I perhaps feel obliged to find out. So let me go back and research. Let me see if I can ask the curators if they found a further record of it. I'm going to say, I don't think it mentions on the form. I'm going to assume perhaps not, because then there will be a further record which I think our curators would probably have found. But let me go and check, and maybe I can either update people next month, or maybe we can pop that in. If you watch our social media, maybe we can pop out a little tweet or something about that. That's a really fascinating question. Thank you.
A question from Laura, and then Joanne asks, have all the names in these sorts of records been indexed?
Not all, but some. So the Switching the Lens project is ongoing, and so as part of that you can access that database online, and you'll be able to find the names that we are. But that is a volunteer project that's a work in progress. So if you have an interest in that, please, best thing to do is just search Switching the Lens London Metropolitan Archive. You can get access to the data as it is, but that will be something that's being updated over the next few years. Really, as I say, it's an ongoing project. Thank you. Any more questions? Wonderful.
There's a question about whereabouts East India Docks is.
Okay, East India Docks is today. It's, if you think where, I'm trying to picture it in the map here. If you think where Canary Wharf is today, if you keep on going east round the bend in the river, it's there, and there's very little of it survives. So the docks have been filled in. There's only a small pool, and then there's a little bit of an original wall. So that wall has pretty much been built over. The West India dock is still the footprint is still obviously there, but now the trade is in money rather than goods. So that's kind of Canary Wharf, Kansas Tower area. Thank you. And are there any more questions, Simon? I think there might be one more question coming through. So whilst we're just wrangling that last question, if you are interested in any of those talks mentioned, or there's more besides that, the best thing to do is to pop onto Eventbrite, where many of you will have probably found about this talk, and you can book them through that. Was there a last question, Simon? No, I think so. I think that's all the questions. If anything does come to mind, you're very welcome to get us on our social media or to write in. Very happy to answer any more questions that might come up. So thank you for joining us in person, and thank you again for joining us at home. I hope to see you next month. Bye now.